lose my book. This feels like a funeral. No, I don't like this period. Oh, there we go. There we go. Good evening. I'd like to call our special meeting to order. It is 5 p.m. and I'd like to welcome all of you. This is a special meeting of the Kent School District Board, which is held in public to comply with the Open Public Meeting Act. At this time, we will be going into an executive session for approximately 30 minutes. The purpose of this executive session is to evaluate the performance of a public employee. We'll return about 5:30. Thank you. good evening, and welcome to our special work session. It is 5:30, and I'm calling the work session to order. Just a couple of housekeeping items that Dr. Jewel Harmon, Chief Accountability Officer, Mr. Damon Hunter, Associate Superintendent of Human Resources, and Mr. Ben Rarick, Associate Superintendent of Finance, will be attending the meeting via Zoom. I'm going to go on now to 1.03, the roll call. At this time, the board will take a roll call for attendance, and I'll ask each board member if they're present or not, starting with Vice President Benno.
Present.
Director Farah.
Here.
Director Clark.
Present.
And myself, of course, I'm present. All right, I'd like to turn to our Superintendent Vela for some introductions about our evening.
Thank you, President Hamada. It gives me great delight to introduce to you and our community Dr. Larry Nyland, who will be facilitating our work session today. Exciting to have him with us again, and especially leading us through this very important process as it relates to the superintendent evaluation and goal planning framework for 22-23. So, Dr. Nyland.
Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent Vela, President Hamada, members of the board. Delighted to be with you again, and congratulate you on the work that has been going on so far, and would invite President Hamada to give a brief overview of where we've been in this journey.
Well, first of all, this is going into almost my third year here, and I just think it's been so helpful to have Dr. Nyland come in and kind of work with us with his experience and expertise, not only in the school system, but in the Washington State School Districts Association, that he's led work on evaluations and goals and all that. So the expertise that we're getting, even beyond our school district, has been very, very valid for me. We started out, just trying to find out and doing something simple as talking about successes that we had in 21, 22, and to Superintendent Vela's credit, instead of just kind of sitting back and letting things roll out, he brought forth in the fall some initiatives that he thought really needed to be done with his expertise and experience in the building. And he put those forth in the fall. I don't know how many of you really noticed that, but that was noteworthy. And then he wanted to build upon that. And at the end of the year, a lot of our discussion and resources and everything, we discussed that. The staff brought forth their ideas on this in several meetings and talked about what had been accomplished. And in addition to that, the board kind of sat down and wrote a bunch of successes that they saw and opportunities going forth. And we did that in more than one meeting. A lot of that really revolved around the superintendent's evaluation. But those evaluations are going to, and goals are setting forth for a good foundation to go into the 2022-2023 year to continue on with that. And so I'm excited to see that when you sit and list, when we listed all those things that the board listed all the things that we had accomplished, sometimes we think we're just spinning our wheels and not getting anywhere, but when you see all those things, it's pretty darn impressive. And I appreciate that we went through that process, and that even in some challenging years, in a challenging year with having an interim and, having to pick up an interim, within a few months, that we didn't know we were going to have to do all that, and going through that process and all of that, we've accomplished quite a bit. And I'm excited going forth in the 22-23 school year, and that's why we're here tonight, to kind of begin that process. And I'm excited, and we also, on just kind of a side note, we brought in a WASDA trainer to kind of not necessarily talk about our priorities or stuff like that, but to help us as a board work together better so we can come together and work and ultimately have it for the betterment of our kids in this district. So Dr. Nyland,
All right.
go ahead.
Thank you, President Hamada. Oh, okay.
Space bar or the mouse. You just-
All right, there we go. Get the technology to work. So, kind of a big picture of why I'm excited to have the opportunity to work with Kent School District is to share just a little bit about what the research is and why it's important. So this is a little bit of the roadmap on the screen. On the left side, we've talked about an evaluation of last year and then a forward look for the coming year, both for the superintendent evaluation and for district goals. And on the right hand, as President Hamada mentioned, you've begun some good work with the Washington State School Directors Association in terms of board self-evaluation and the Board of Distinction process. And as I mentioned to you before, kudos for that. I'm a big fan of WASDA. WASDA leads the nation in research-based criteria for school boards. And I've had the delight to work with boards in my background that it's really made a tremendous difference, both for the board and for kids. So kudos to you for undertaking that process with WASDA and kind of learning how we can all learn and grow. Kind of a brief recap of what we've talked about before. The Board of Distinction process for WASDA is based on the Iowa Lighthouse study, which was kind of the first process of figuring out, does it matter what school boards do? And it turns out it matters a lot. This slide comes from work by Dr. Robert Marzano from a large-scale study of districts that have been successful and then trying to unpack what it is that they've done. And number one on the list is collaborative goal setting. So that's part of our discussion tonight, and good for you for going there. The next part of it is non-negotiable goals for achievement and instruction. So keeping the focus on student learning and holding ourselves accountable for the results and then getting better. Board alignment and support of the district goals, monitoring achievement and instructional goals. You get the theme here. So it's important to have the goals, and then it's actually important to monitor and follow through on the goals. And then the last one is really telling, is are we putting dollars in the budget around it? And for me, well, I've got two stories that you've heard before, but I'll tell them again. One is in Marysville, through the Board of Distinction process, we heard from staff about the fact that we did not have a good way to measure student progress for middle school math. And so when budget time came, the board insisted, even though it was a tough budget year, we've got to find the money and we've got to provide teachers with the tools that they need to improve learning for middle school math. And then in Seattle, Seattle did set $5 million aside each year for the goal priorities, and then asked the superintendent to come back with a plan for how those dollars could be used to improve student learning. So anyway, I'm biased. I think you're on the right track. And that's what we want to talk about a little bit tonight. I think number 2 on that list was collaborative goal setting. So this idea that it's not just the board, it's not just the superintendent, it's not even the board and the superintendent together. It's cabinet, it's all of the staff and the community. So how do we all come together with these overlapping circles, all focused on student success? So that'll also be a little bit of our discussion tonight in terms of how do we reach out and engage others in this goal setting process. And then the arrows, which you've seen before as well, but kind of the idea that 3,500 employees, something like that, in Kent School District, all dedicated, working hard, moving forward in what they see as their task. the challenge at the district level is how to coordinate all of that work so that it's all pulling together in the same direction. And that's what these arrows represent, that, you know, when you finally get to that point and everybody's pulling in the same direction, good things happen. So I think oh, there it is right at the top. My mantra, 4 years, 4 goals, student achievement. You know, that if you can keep the focus, and in the beginning, you know, we seldom do get the goal perfect, but when we collect the data and find out where we didn't get it right, and that if you do that 4 years in a row, you get pretty doggone good at it. I mean, you think of, you know, what a freshman does from freshman sports through varsity sports. So that's our goal. So on your agenda, we've kind of given a recap of where Kent has been and a recap of why this work is important. Part B on the agenda is moving into the superintendent evaluation form. So part of board policy in terms of doing the superintendent evaluation by the end of June each year. So you've accomplished that for last year. Good job. And we're now talking about what should that process look like going forward. So as President Hamada indicated, I had the opportunity a few years back to work with the Washington State School Directors Association on a superintendent evaluation process. And we created and piloted 5 different models. And this is one of those pilots that is kind of a hybrid of those other models. And I won't take time to go into the other models unless you want to. But this particular model seems to fit well with Kent and the focus that Kent has had on continuous improvement. That was part of the hallmark for the HR review that we went through this last year. And so has these 5 components in it. So the first part is it's got a rubric to it, which I don't know if you've dug that far into what teachers have and what principals have, but we now have rubrics for research-based criteria for each employee group. This follows that pattern. This is a relatively short list of about 20 criteria, but research-based. The collaborative goal setting process that is also part of what we're talking about tonight. And then the idea of a mid-year review and an end-of-year review. So not just waiting until the end of the year and saying, what were those goals again? How did we do on those? So you have in your packet one that starts with homework. And since 4th of July came along, I don't know that too many people had a chance to dig into that. It has, right behind the homework page, it has a 1-pager that has WASD at the bottom. And that's a 1-page recap of the evaluation process that's being proposed for your review. And then about a half a dozen pages behind that give you some of the forms that would go with it. So I thought that I would, take some questions about where we are at this particular point in time, where this model came from, whatever you're interested in about that. And then after we do that, I wanted to give you maybe about 5 minutes to look, at least thumb through those attachments, with the idea that you don't have to decide tonight. This will come back and be on a board agenda at some point for a first and second reading, but always better to get the input early and not in the middle of that final process. So if not tonight, shortly after tonight, homework is to take a look at that document and see how you want to tweak it and whether that's going to meet your needs or not. So I'll pause and say, you know, what questions do you have at this particular point in time?
If I can. So when I look at our job, fundamental in annual operations is budget. So fiscal stability is absolutely critical for success. But the reality is, if I were to look at the superintendent, it would, in my mind, come out more resource management because it is obviously fiscal, but it's also personnel, and it's also dealing with the specific issues that boil up as the school year goes along. And I didn't see anything that kind of brought those concepts into a tighter figure. I mean, I looked at an environmental indicator, and there were things there, and fiscal is obvious, and human resources is obvious, but the fact is, the superintendent has to have his ear solidly in the conversations floating up from all of those.
Right.
So is there, how have other people expressed that?
I think that's a great observation, and I think that's one that we should dig into. I'm on this second page in this document, which is kind of the score sheet for all of it, and I think that's what you were referring to. So yeah, I think you're suggesting that we dig into those environmental factors and find out whether they really express that monitoring of the budget and keeping everybody aware of where we are in that cycle. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
That's
good.
in the ballpark.
I just wanted to kind of, I'm looking over here the evaluation, but where are we gonna get, are we gonna get the data to measure that? So therefore, we know if we reach this goal or not.
Right. You get data in a variety of ways. So one, you would get it in terms of all of the work that's being done during the year. Two, you would get it from the superintendent in the self-evaluation at the beginning, and then I guess a self-evaluation at the end in terms of the evidence given to the board so that the board can complete the rating. That said, that's come up a couple of times now in our earlier discussions, so I think that's a great discussion as this process gets finalized to say, did those measures of evidence, did they make it into the documents in a way that meets the needs? So, yeah, I agree, we do better when we have clear targets.
For me, I don't have any questions. I just think about, this is very similar to the TPEP, like how I get evaluated as a classroom teacher. Like, it's very similar, like evidence is gathered in different ways through meetings. Obviously with the superintendents could be a little bit different because it's public, but just like reports, meetings, evaluate, like classroom visits, like I feel like evidence is gathered, and then based on the evidence that's gathered, we evaluate based on what that looks like. I feel like it feels, to me, this doesn't stress me out. This is normal because it feels like this is what I go through yearly. So to me, it makes a lot of sense, and I'm eager to kind of see how this will go into practice. Because I've been evaluated, so I'm curious what it's going to look like using this model on the superintendent and how we gather that evidence to make sure. But then it's figuring out what exactly, because in a classroom, as a classroom teacher, I set those goals with my building principals. So then they kind of check in with me. So I'm curious kind of how that will look like. I'm sure Dr. Nyland is going to walk us through what that process will look like for.
And if I may, Dr. Nyland, that's great. Yeah, Vice President Beno, that couldn't help but just dig in before my part, but really this whole process that we're going through together collaboratively really should align, and there should be a through line with exactly what Vice President Beno just said. The system, the through line through the system really is around the collaborative goals that we've developed together. Yes, there'll be offshoots and there'll be priorities that we will come up with together. And the data piece is exactly part of what will help us not only establish what those goals are and where we are, but also help us monitor how we're doing.
Absolutely.
And as Dr. Nyland mentioned earlier, good systems also assess it periodically like you would in a classroom for student learning. It is, I think Vice President Benoit, we talked about DeFore's question, so.
Oh, yeah.
If we know that, if we're meeting that, what are we doing? If we're not meeting that, that benchmark, if you will, then what are we doing? And so we monitor and adjust, so it's exciting to be able to see. So the through line I was going to mention is that once we move to, establishing these, settling on where we are, prioritizing, that this is a through line with all my team throughout the system, anybody that supports kids, so that we are progressing together, not just as a board, but as a full system. And so I appreciate you saying that. That is a connection that's good to bring out to our
And even with
community.
like our strategic planning we're gonna do, like it's all connected. So
Exactly.
in my brain, I see it as a very clear
Connection,
line.
yeah. Yeah, thank you,
I'm
Dr.
excited.
Nye. I just wanted to point that out now, which is a perfect opportune time to do that.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I forgot to mention that this does parallel teacher and principal evaluation formats, yeah?
And I think about like, there's 8 categories. I don't get evaluated fully on all 8 every year. And so there's focus areas, and some years I do get evaluated on all of them. So it really allows for a 360. Like, I don't love it, but it's a way to evaluate, and that we use it in the state, and I think it's good for what it needs to do for us. And this is gonna be fun too.
To me, I mean, I've never been a teacher, but I mean, to have the very head of our organization, to have the similar criteria, I mean, it seems like that would make it a more fair playing field with them. I don't know how they look on that, but I'm curious because it's one of our former board directors always was looking at what that one person, that superintendent, did to start all this and put it in place. I'm curious how we're going to actually see that. I mean, we're going to be evaluating our superintendent and one person can't do it all, but they start a catalyst to make it. And is that going to be clearly defined so we can say that, oh, yeah, because our superintendent did this, and this? Are we going to be able to identify that, do you think, through this method too?
You're jumping ahead in a good way.
Oh, I'm
So,
sorry, I'm sorry.
You want to talk about that now, or you want to talk about that
Yeah,
in a
no,
moment?
absolutely, I can, and so, as I mentioned earlier, as we settle on those priorities, goal areas, because Vice President Beno is exactly right. It isn't that you're not evaluating on all the areas, but you're focusing on different areas. Your data is being used to prioritize a district. I'll use a fiscal example, right? So if our data show that fiscal stability is something that we've been bouncing back with, which we have, and we're doing great, how are we going to stay there, and what indicators are we going to use that'll share with the board that we are there? Better than that, how is the superintendent working with his or her team and leaders who are really the systems people and the operations people who are making this happen? It's not about one person, it's the whole system, and the board's included in that. That's a collaborative approach. And so, in short, as we move forward with the superintendent's goals, hopefully by October working, but we'll be done by October 15th with, hopefully in September, we'll have hopefully the second reading, that then what that does for the superintendent's executive cabinet is now we have, back to, I think, the other slide on coherence, we have a coherent approach to how we're going to focus on student achievement and support that through an operations perspective, through a systems perspective, through whatever those areas the data leads us to. Now the through line is that my team then works with each and every one of their teams that support schools, that support student success, that those goals are now through the whole system. So my intent and our intent really is to have these goals forward-facing. Our community is going to be seeing what we finally come up with together, and that is through the whole system. Because we start the goal-setting process similar to what happens with teachers, as Vice President Beno mentioned, that we start that in the fall as well. So what are our goals for this year as an administrative team supporting schools? And how are they connected or not to what the superintendent's being held accountable for. And in a big picture is the board is being held and holding themselves accountable for. So that's the through line as we keep moving, and that's the goal, so that we can reach the Board of Distinction piece, and what the research says around, if we are focused, the great things will happen, not for us generally, but for our kids. And that's really what we're doing this for. And we're doing this, we're forward-facing this process to our community, which I think is important for us. So I'll turn it back over to
Thank you.
Dr. Nyman.
Are you ready to move to that section? Ready to move to goal setting? All right. Well, again, kudos. We had a good session earlier where board members provided input on the successes and the opportunities from last year, opportunities for the coming year. Executive Cabinet weighed in on that as well. And so there's been a lot of continued conversation about how to bring that together as an integrated set of goals going forward. So the next section that you have in your packet has yellow highlights on it, and it probably looks very similar to some of the work that you've seen before. And the idea of going forward would be to land tonight on 4 or 5 big goal areas, to give the superintendent and the executive cabinet opportunity after that to come back with detailed goals and those benchmarks, and to adopt those in a first reading, second reading sometime before October 15th. So that's kind of where we're headed, and at this point I would turn it over to Superintendent Valla to talk about what Cabinet's been doing and how they've been interacting with the ideas that the board has been putting forth regarding goals, opportunities for the coming year.
Great, thank you, Dr. Nyland. Yes, I'll direct our board to the form that's in our on the website on BoardDocs. It's really goal opportunities for 22-23 Kent School District. You'll see the top of it with a short bulleted narrative of shared goals, governance, kind of talking about the why piece. And if we focus on these key areas back to us working collaboratively on 4 goals plus 4 years well equals student achievement. The process by which we do that, we actually started it. If you recall, 21-22, as President Hamada mentioned, yes, my team stayed focused on priority initiatives even though it was in an interim year. We talked about that. In fact, we just completed that evaluation of an interim year that were around those shared priorities. And you see those in this document. So you've got the alignment for the goals. You see the 4 goals in yellow band. You also see that I'll call the priority initiatives were listed on the side under 21-22, the column, listed as strategies or priority initiatives. And then we engaged into the next 2 columns on successes. We talked about, so what were some of those successes, and my team worked with their teams on what were some of those successes. So evidence, if you will, back to Vice President Beno's comment about artifacts and looking at what is our evidence from a systems perspective. We began to list some of those you see in column 2 under each one of those goal areas. And then we also, the board worked together. And I know President Hamada collected a lot of not only did we meet, but collected a lot of your own. You went back and started adding to some of those successes as well that helped my team better understand, oh yeah, we forgot that. And we wanted to make sure we noted those. And more importantly on this document, you see the opportunities. We engaged in that. So what are some remaining opportunities from 21-22? Some of the things we want to continue to work on. I'll use the example of one of them just to help us ground ourselves in that. A goal was to kickstart under the leadership of Dr. Wade Berenger on the virtual academy, right? It's one thing to accomplish the opening. Now it's going to be another in 22-23 that we really focus on the success of Virtual Academy and the continuation and making sure that we're funding it with the resources it needs in order to be successful, and aligning those goals that we come up with together as a board, superintendent, governance team to know that we are hitting the mark, if you will. So I just took one little example, because not only was it a success, it also is one of those things we're not going to lose sight of and continuing to work on. And we began to list some of those, and the board engaged in that as well. You'll see that on the right column in all of these goals, from goal 1, 2, and 3. I'll point out goal 3 on creating effective organizational systems. And this really kind of speaks to Director Clark's question earlier about, what about the budget part and finance pieces? You know, that it fits squarely in a lot of these pieces in making sure we're stable fiscally. The passing of the EPNO levy was critical, as you can see there in goal 3 in the first bullet across the successes. Important for us is to continue that work. Again, I'll use our focus under the leadership of Dr. Behringer in working toward this piece. It is really how we're going to continue this moving forward, not only just for levies, but making sure that if we move toward the bond pieces, as we talked to the board earlier, how are we going to continue that focus so that we stay strong in the future. But anyway, you can see that those were listed under successes in our dialogue that we had together. And so we just kind of put all of them under the opportunities. And as we work closer tonight, and the board kind of has more input on, so, okay, there are some other ones that we perhaps need to add to that, or we're going to also say, these are the areas we want to focus on. So we begin to kind of get closer to those focus goals that we want to get to in terms of prioritization. And again, we don't have to do it tonight, but we certainly begin that conversation with the board tonight. So I'll stop there and then just open it up to the board on any questions you might have of what's listed, or any other suggestions you have on opportunities. Maybe you've had a chance to look at them now again, that you might want us to capture some other pieces. As my team then will take your input again, go back, and then when we come back together in August during a work session, we'll continue honing our efforts towards prioritizing those for 22-23.
I mean,
I'll open it up to the board.
I have a comment, or somewhere we can fit this in. I know we've been talking about community-based organizations, and I feel like that would go into 1B under students being college and career ready. I think that needs to be captured somewhere. I also know that there's a conversation about community schools that's coming up or that's happening that we need to be prepared for, that I think that would also fall in there, making sure wraparound services are available to students. And I know there's conversations about school-based health centers and things like that. That should be, I think, captured there. So there's a piece, I think, under 1B that student voice is a piece, but it's not everything for college and career readiness. But I think that making sure that students have the resources they need to be successful or be ready to be successful to graduate, I think is important. I think that was a comment I had that we didn't necessarily capture, that I know that we've discussed that I wanted to capture.
Thank you. If I may, that's a great example of what are some pieces, maybe we missed it in one place. Let's make sure we capture it. That's a great example. Thank you.
I have to tag onto that. As a former high school teacher, one of the things that staff continues to encourage is developing leadership. And that it shows up in basically every activity that we do. And it clearly creates a growth pattern. I mean, we see, DECA kids going off to nationals. I mean, that's pretty entrancing. But when I think about giving students an opportunity, I have felt that we have underutilized the media services that we have available, and that we haven't because of distractions on a wide variety of things, haven't taken the time to try and help develop the ability to improve district and building and student information transformation and communication. Because at one time, I mean, I had this off-the-wall idea that one of the things that would happen would be they could use the studio and then use video clips from athletic contests or other types of, music contests and even plays, and use clips of those in a video format that would help the building celebrate what has been going on, because there's so much hard work, and then it suddenly just gets culminated in a project, and not everybody hears about it, and there are some wonderful things that kids are doing. And that would be a student production. And we do have staff within certainly this, all the high schools, and I suspect many of the middle schools have people that would be willing to work on some form of that, but we would have to support them in gaining access to it. And I think that could make a dramatic difference in terms of how the students view themselves and what's going on in the year. Plus, of course, in the wonderful world of climate change and COVID variation, news that sometimes has to be very specific and very clearly understood could be produced in that particular fashion by the students themselves.
No, I appreciate that. That's another great example of capturing, what do we need to elaborate a little bit more on? And I really see that under student, not only just student voice, but it's leadership.
Right.
And how do we provide more opportunities for access to, in this case, the different technology forums, if you will. And then the transition of where we've been with technology to where we are today. You mentioned, schools have individuals. We have Emilio, who joined us from a school.
Yeah.
And I know, I can say this right now. I want to thank Emilio for all the work that he's done in the school district as a student.
Yes.
And then as a staff. Is a great example. I bring that up. And I know we've had conversations about, how's technology changing as it relates to video, right? But more importantly, how are we creating opportunity and choice that creates leadership opportunities for those who haven't had those leadership opportunities, right? And he's done a great job of just modeling that. I mean, you've seen the videos that he's done along with our communications team, but I know I'm embarrassing him, but that's okay. It's his last day, and I can do that. Okay. And it aligns with what Director Clark just shared. But in short, I so appreciate that, and we will capture that because I think there's more to come in that area. And back to evidence of impact, right? So
Yes.
what might be some of those things that we showcase and highlight at our board meetings of how we're meeting the needs of students as they become leaders in the communities and in society, utilizing technology like that. So that's wonderful. Thank you, Director Clark.
Well, that would be my question to kind of add on to that, is doing an inventory of all the schools to see, like, this is all CTE, so I'm going to plug CTE too, because this is something that can be done through the CTE program. And just checking to see that all the CTE programs at all the school have same resources, because my guess is that they don't, because I remember going to a school where they were not using a video lab, and I was shocked that they weren't using a video lab there, because not all the schools probably have the same resources. So maybe doing an inventory of what our CTE programs or leadership programs, because I know like DECA and some of those are all CTE clubs. So doing, some kind of inventory to make sure that all the schools have equal resources. And with CTE, you know, it equals funds, so it would benefit us to be more inclusive of CTE because that'll bring more funds to them.
So I thank you, Vice President Beno. The other word I think about when you just said that is equity and access, right? So if we think of, and I think I've used this before with our board, if we can think about a student that comes to the Kent School District in pre-K through 21, let's say, because if they may need services through 21, that how do we guarantee, you know, we talk about a guaranteed and viable curriculum and seat in the Kent School District as it relates to equity. How do we guarantee that? Right? That's a challenge for us.
Yes.
And what you just shared, inventory is one of, it's kind of like that's data, right? So how are we doing, how are we doing currently? How do we need to adjust? What's our goal? How will we monitor where we're going? And then better than that, to have students come back and tell us how we're doing with that. So thank you for sharing that, but I think of equity and access. And Dr. Fair, I think you had a,
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to, my engineer mind goes deep. What it does is that it looks at the data. So what I would like us to do is look where we are today, take a picture of that, because collectively is how we succeed, right? The ultimate goal is to make sure these kids are ready for the future and in a bigger picture, right? But then go into details, how do we achieve those goals, is how we set up those and datum points to see, okay, we're not meeting here, why? Learn lesson, go back, redo that. Learn lesson, go back, redo that. So that we know from today to year, however, what have we done? So that's where I'm kind of still trying to figure out how do we achieve that. So therefore we say, here we are, and here's where we're gonna be, and along the way that we have milestones and say, okay, how are we doing today? Take a stock of what we've done. Are we meeting this? Are we on track? Yes, thank you, keep going. We're not on track, what do we do?
Yeah.
You know, keep going. That's how my,
it's exciting to me, it really is, as a former classroom teacher, that,
Yeah.
you know, these are pieces that we dealt with every year, right? But I also thought about a fiscal question when you
Right.
said that.
absolutely.
And back to Director Clark's question earlier, that we have to think about it, that
Right.
that's also a fiscal
It is fiscal.
question. And I will also point out that our darts team has done a great job over the years in getting to where we are today and being able to have the data systems we have. Are we there yet? No, but we're getting there. And that's why this goal-setting process that we're in is so critical, because they are very good at that systems part of it, but they also are good at being able to help us with what you just said, Dr. Farah, is what systems can we put in place so we can very quickly know if we're getting there through the use of data dashboards that you've seen in this dais from our team already, and how do we incorporate that with what we're doing, what we will come up with by October 15th here as a board. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I want to add that, you know, we have a system that is designed by white people for white people, and we want to educate kids of color in that system. Now, we have to be brave to make sure that we are making sure that these kids are ready for the future, knowing the fact that we are working with that system. So let's make sure that we put that as one of the criteria to achieve that, because in reality, we're preparing for the future leaders of our community.
Yep.
So,
No, I appreciate you adding that part in, because the equity piece we've talked about, that it's actually spread through all of the goals that you see here. But we have to be intentional about the progress we want to see
Right.
in our black and brown student groups
Right.
who have not had access potentially in the past.
Right.
And or have not had the resources, and that's why it's important, the work we do together. I appreciate the inventory piece. That'll give us quick look. So do they all have access? That's the first piece. Do we have the professional development and the type of supports that our teams need out to help support our kids to get them there? How are we utilizing community groups
Right.
and partners who work with a lot of our students that need additional supports? And so we also have to have high expectations of our student groups, who and sometimes, and through no fault of anybody's other than, we can't just simply say that this program is only for this student group or this type of student.
Right.
We need to provide those opportunities so that
For
they can decide, they have more student choice with that. And so how could we do that? So I appreciate you pointing that out.
Well, and I'm going to go back to what Director Clark said about the finances, is from a marketing perspective, I'm not sure we're doing a really good job of selling all the things that we're doing out there. And, I mean, I was lucky enough, privileged enough, very meaningful me to go to the TOPS graduation this year. And those videos of those kids, if we could have taken some of those, taken that out to our community and saying, hey, or other things that we've done, it's more than if I'd get up and say we're supporting equity, but if you saw the faces of those kids when they were showing their videos and all the things that they'd accomplished, we couldn't probably go through all 35 of them. That was quite something, but do a couple of them and kind of have like highlights, like this is what's coming on in our schools. This is what we're producing, whether it's in sports, whether it's through our plays, which are dynamite that I've been to, or whatever we're doing, and do a better job, because even though we're not in the business of selling, we are in the business of trying to get funds to keep our levies going, to make it work. So if I were a taxpayer and I was sitting at a luncheon or something, we're talking about, if the kids would come to those Rotaries, those Kiwanis, those chambers, those meetings, and bring videos with them and present it, I think that has, just like in the legislature, the representatives focus on the kids when they talk.
But why aren't we, would be my question. Like, why aren't we?
And
We should be.
I think, not that we haven't done it, but I don't think we're doing it a lot.
I appreciate that, President Hamada. What I think of the word, by the way, this is a great conversation. I appreciate this, that the word I think about is celebrate your successes. And how are we doing and how are we forward facing it to our community so you can see some of the great things going on in CTE. You've heard of my superintendent reports. I'll point those pieces out. There's more to be said, as there is to be said about other programs that great things are happening, but I definitely hear, how do we celebrate those successes? And by the way, that second column you see on this form, that's how we started the, not only did we have the priorities, let's talk about together as a superintendent board governance team, what were some of the successes for this year? And so I look forward as we continue to work together, prioritizing our goals, so we really target where we want to go and see improvement. But I also look forward to this a cyclical process that we're actually modeling for our community, what really should be happening in our schools, in our communities in terms of CBOs, and that we're always assessing how we're doing and changing direction when we need to. But don't forget to celebrate those pieces. So heard that loud and clear. Thank you.
Quite a celebration.
So as the board continues to think about, do this now, but as we look at prioritizing, what would be potentially 4 or 5 goals that you would prioritize? Again, not that you would be dismissing all of them, but what would be 4 or 5 of those that the board could have a conversation now about, or where that might be? And again, remember, we have a couple other sessions together, but I would love for my team to hear from you and then go back and add what we just talked about. But also as we hone in to those areas, it'd be great to hear what might those goals be.
Just so hard to kind of think about, like Director Farrow was saying, there's so much data we can collect, but what data is going to be the best data to show growth? And I know the easy stuff is like standardized testing, but like that I don't feel like is always valid or reliable because it's not the same groups of students. So then what do we use instead? And that's
Yeah.
what I challenge myself with, is like, what can we do that's not necessarily, here's a test score, because I'm not anti-testing, but like, I need, like, standardized testing doesn't always show everything, so then what can we do, because, and you have nothing to do with standardized testing, so then what can we necessarily do that's within your realm that can show growth? And that's kind of where I'm stuck, because we can look at lots of different things.
Yeah.
Like we can, but I don't know. And so I guess that's why I need to do a little bit of my little board homework
Sure.
to kind of think about what would that look like? And I think I would come fresh with different ideas, but I think I need to think a little bit more about what that looks like.
No, thank you. I just wanted to add, I appreciate that. Because one of the things as I think about as a classroom teacher, I think of what you were just saying, it's really balanced assessments.
Yeah.
Right? If we simply did the standardized, that's the autopsy at the end, right? Versus, how do we know we're progressing? And as our new ESSA forward-facing school improvement planning process is really about looking at what other types of assessments can we also include as we think about the whole child.
Right.
And when we think about it that way, we then begin to incorporate the social emotional needs that a student needs in addition to the academic needs or gaps that they may have. And it's a challenging question, but our DARTS team is ready and willing and able to be able to help us with how we might set that path forward. But I appreciate what you said. It's like, let me think about this a little bit more, because it is different from a systems perspective. You know, I know there are tools out there where, and I know Dr. Nyland has seen tools out there on how you measure strategic plan goals, as an example. There's lots of different companies. But the reality is, what goes on in a classroom is really what we need to stay a focus on, and how do we provide those supports so that we can have the resources to see how students are progressing. Even if it's just from point A to B, that's progress. And we want to be able to note that in some way, shape, or form.
And that's something I feel like I constantly educate the community about, is just like, my students that have an IEP, they're gonna show different growth, but they still have an A to B point, versus my students who are in IB classes or AP classes, they're gonna show different A to B points, and just
Exactly.
celebrating all the growth. And so what does that look like? And to kind of use one data point is hard, because we know that there's multiple data points inside the classroom, but as a district, as we talk about our strategic plan and our goals, that's kind of lofty.
It's really, yeah.
Yeah.
That's-
And another challenging part of that, it really is, if I saw growth,
Right.
how can can I actually relate it and equate it to what we did?
Yeah.
Yep.
That's where I'm
That's-
hanged up.
yeah.
What
That's where
caused
I'm-
that growth?
yeah.
Because we want to replicate that.
Right.
Yeah.
So from a
could be a-
systems perspective, it's
Right, right.
important. So, Director Farah.
Yeah, we could be, further along, but we don't know reference point, right? So if we have a reference point, then we can continuously improve upon that reference point.
Yeah.
And know. I don't know, maybe I'm thinking, and this is one of the things that I always want to advocate, is that the intentionality of hiring, right? So we really have to hone in that. I know, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can develop within district, as Director Clark has mentioned multiple times, but also I want us to go out of our way to recruit teachers that look like the student body that we have, which is more than
Yeah.
70%.
No, I think you kind of got to, there's a priority I think I've heard over the last few sessions with us, even with that, I think, or was a support Sandy, is around, goal 4, right? In a retain a diverse and premier workforce, right? So we need to continue our focus in there. And I think, Dr. Clark, you shared this earlier about how do we grow your own, how do we make sure we're looking at growing including students, but growing our current staff and making sure that they're wanting to not only come to Kent Schools, but stay in the Kent School District. And I know that, I've said this before, excited to have our new Associate Superintendent of HR, Mr. Damon Hunter, who certainly is scouring the Moss Adams report to come back to us with an implementation plan and that. But back to this, it needs to be in alignment with our goals.
Absolutely.
And I think I just heard you, Director Farah, that we need to stay focused in that area. So potentially that might be a focus area.
And you made me think of a couple of things we've talked about, like the Teacher Academy program at the high school, and even like the Seattle Teacher Residency program that they do to have staff commit to teaching in Seattle. But they work with University of Washington, they provide stipends.
Right.
I don't know what that looks like, but just even looking at, thinking outside of the box, looking at other models like what Seattle does,
Absolutely.
and see what we can do here, because I think that would benefit us as well. And that would get to what we talked about last time, not just the high school portion, which I still think we need to do a Teacher Academy program, but also like, what can we do to get people now, and something like that, even though it couldn't happen immediately, because there's things like contracts and money.
Oh, yeah.
But if we really believe in this,
Yeah.
doing that, then that's something I think we should look at doing. So I'm gonna put that into the universe, and hopefully we can kind of look at what they do and see if we can model something like that here, even if it's not UW, but I know that the Teacher Academy program works with Central, so it's just one of the things we can look at, so bring it into the universe.
Thank you.
But I think that's good.
Other thoughts, Director Clark, on maybe some focus areas that come off the top of your head?
It's inescapable that we know that we've had a deficit in learning thanks to COVID. And it's inevitably things become evident as state reports show where we're at. Now, I'm well aware that this is a universal within the state, but that's not going to excuse the fact that the public very clearly, they can accept a rationale that in fact there were unusual circumstances, but it can't be continuing.
Right, for so long. yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
I see that as a priority that we face. It's tied to everything.
No,
Absolutely.
I appreciate that, and thank you for that. It just reminded me of, actually, if I look at the first yellow band, goal one is really the academic recovery and student well-being plan. We can't lose sight of the fact, this was our first complete year of in-person learning. In 2 years, 3 years, right? And so what did we learn from it? So back to data. How'd we do? How'd we do from the perspective of the data that the state was capturing, knowing that we had that same setback across the district? But more than that, how are we going to move forward? And so I think that goal one, certainly both A and B, but in A you see our teaching and learning team has been doing a lot of work around planning for the next 5 years. You heard that from Ms. Donnell West when she talked about the plans that they have around making sure that we have resources that, in terms of adoptions that we have, so things can continue in a cyclical basis to support our classrooms. That we're also looking at data on what are the gaps that exist and continue to exist, and how are we utilizing current resources to be able to meet this. So I think that will continue to be a priority, if I hear you right, and how we get there by the use of data and how do we utilize resources is what I think about. So
The flip of that too, though, is Superintendent Villa, we had a few kids that probably really thrived under this. And I would be interested in understanding if we could get some data how that happened too. There's a lot of outside factors I know that can play into that, but
no, I appreciate you bringing that up. That's a good point.
there are some kids that
That's right, yeah.
that thrived.
I'd like to,
And I'd like to know,
Yeah, when you think about the ones that thrived in that virtual setting.
Right.
Right, that's given all the other issues that we had at the initial, right, with the network connectivity and access, by the way.
Right.
The hotspots or lack thereof, a number of things. We still had students that kind of thrived. And how are we looking at that data, right? And how quick we learn from that as we move forward? And how do we continue to fill those gaps that exist? So definitely noted. So I want to just double check with Dr. Nyland. I lost track of time. I know that the board is right now, just to kind of summarize, we've been talking about, the opportunities on this form for 22-23 and how we're trying to hone into some, 4 goals, 4 or 5 priority goals. I think what I heard is, correct me if I'm wrong, was need a little bit more time to kind of keep honing in on those. That'll help my team also do the same after tonight, capture some new information for us, but that's very helpful. I just wanted to also add for the board that we have other sessions coming, and we look at August to continue this conversation. We'll kind of collect what was added, maybe get to closer to the 4 goals areas, keep fleshing those out, and then looking towards September to look at a first and a second reading, so that once we hit September, we're kind of focused and we know where we want to go. And like I said, from a through line perspective, that'll help my team as school starts, particularly our school improvement planning teams, that, think of this, that they all of our systems that support kids will have the goals that were collaboratively reached with board superintendent, governance team, and community, right? How might we include community within this process? I think that's one thing that I just thought about just now. Not only just listening here, but how might we potentially hear from them about the conversations that we're having, particularly those Black and brown families, right. Dr. Farah, that you should. How do we hear from them to see kind of where they are? But all that to say, thank you for this I think robust conversation around goals and where we want to go together in 22, 23, and beyond. But I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Nyland just to kind of keep us on track and make sure that we didn't miss something there. So, Dr. Nyland.
Great conversation, and that's really helpful, I think. Delighted that Executive Cabinet's able to be here and participate, hear that conversation, and begin to build all those ideas into goals going forward. So we're on D on the agenda here. The timeline is, we're looking for a word, I don't know that we came up with it. These aren't specific dates. They're target dates, so calendar still needs to be built, and it needs to actually get a date on the calendar that's a specific exact date. But as targets go, October 15th is the goal for getting the goals and the superintendent evaluation format approved and agreed to. Also at that point in time, the superintendent, according to this proposed evaluation timeline, would look at the data and come back with a self-evaluation on the rubric. So that's kind of the professional goal, parallel again to the teacher and principal evaluation processes. And then January 15th, there'd be a mid-year progress report, again looking at data, and data is tough because it doesn't always come in the time frames that we want it to come in, but using data to the extent possible. And then suggesting here that by April 15th, the board starts to have this conversation for the goals for 23-24, so that those goals can be in place by June, along with the budget, and be ready for teachers and principals to know this is the direction that we're going. And then, as you just did, completing the superintendent evaluation by middle to the end of June. So, yeah, those would be important to get on the calendar and protect those times and plan for them so that you get there. And it sounds like the urgent piece, along with everything else, feels like the middle of summer and we're just getting summer weather, and hopefully people still have some opportunities for vacation. And at the same time, August is really the time to come back with some specific goals, with measures around what you've just been talking about, so that it can go on the agenda in September as a first and second reading and be ready by October 15th. So it'll be here before we know it. So with that, I think I'd turn it back to President Hamada to do any final remarks, thoughts, and close this out.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is very helpful the more we think about it in depth. And what it does is to come back here, it gets me thinking more too, to see what I haven't been thinking about for a while, kind of doing some other things.
Right.
And it's good to focus on that. And again, I'd really like to see us reach out to our community a lot more in some capacity. I want to give that some thought, and perhaps not just by a survey. Maybe, I don't know if we can do, I don't know, with COVID still rampant, but in-person town halls or something like that. But they're not easy to do, but I think they've been missing that kind of, so they feel like they're really a part of our community. I think this is really important that we really get these right and try to achieve what we're going to achieve. I think I've never seen this kind of coordination from all the different departments. So again, I'm excited to see that, because when you become a board director, you just don't know all this stuff. And you come into it, and having as much outside help and guidance and stuff, even probably for people who've been on boards for a long time, to work on this is important. And I think we're going to really help our community by getting this more cemented in the way we want it to go. So did anybody on the board have any closing thoughts or things they wanted to talk about?
I have a question for Dr. Nyland. As I reflected back on my many classroom years, the real goal actually was always for student self-actualization. And there must be some general statement of that sits out there that we can incorporate.
My brain goes to a lot of a lot of those. One of the common mantras from many places, you may have already talked about it here, is to, and this isn't going to be quite a direct hit on what you're talking about, but it's kind of like, do we know each student by name, strength, aspiration, hope? And then you're pushing it one level further to say, and does the student know that and act on it? So, awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the intentionality piece. How do we keep the end in view and keep working toward it? Love it, yeah.
Other comments or closing? One thing we didn't really talk a lot about that just came to my mind is our safety, which is universal right now, that all our parents are just so worried about, unfortunately, the kids just being dropped off in the morning and what's going to happen to them throughout the day. And to me, we've got to rise that on to some kind of a priority too. So I would be negligent in not thinking about that. So, but I do want to thank you very much for all your help with this. It's been a pleasure. Don't be a stranger. Stay around, please. So I guess that's about all I have here. So
We want to thank you for helping us achieve this goal, because with a lot of experience.
Delighted. You're on the right track. Appreciate your good work.
Thank you.
all righty.
Adjourn until 7:30.
Okay, and it is, at present, it's 6:39, and we're going to adjourn until 7:30. We'll be back here.
Yay, a dinner break.
Director Farah?
Still here.
Director Clark?
Just plain present.
And I'm obviously here. I would like to now entertain the Director Farah to say the All right, again, it's 7:31. Special meeting is called to order. And I'm going to say that this is a meeting of the Kent School District, which is held in public to comply with the Open Public Meeting Act. We thank those of you who have come to the meeting and those who are viewing on the live stream. We're now on to 1.6, and that's the word acknowledgement. I'd like to call on Director Clark to read.
We acknowledge we are gathered upon the ancestral lands of the Muckleshoot Indian tribe who historically lived throughout the area between the Cascade Mountains and Puget Sound.
Thank you, Director Clark. We're on to 2.0, Board of Directors discussion and approval. First up is 201, purchase of municipal instruments. I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we approve 2.01, purchase of musical instruments.
Second.
Discussion.
That's great.
Yes.
Yeah.
Been- been-
Terrific. I'll call for the vote. All those in favor of 2.01, purchase of municipal instruments, signify by raising your right hand and saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, signify by raising your right hand and saying nay. Abstentions, the motion carries. We are to 2.02, Instructional Materials Committee Textbook Adoption Funds for Reading. I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we approve Instructional Materials Committee textbook adoption, phonics for reading.
Second.
Discussion.
And this is just the ongoing strategy. So,
Any further discussion? And I have a question. This is supplementary to what we already have, is that correct?
I have our interim executive director for teaching and learning, Ms. Christine Corley, to answer that question.
Thank you.
President Amata, Board of Directors, Superintendent Vea, and Ms. Zantello, thank you. Yes, this is supplemental to our core curriculum. So this is really to address the needs of our 3rd through 6th grade students who are reading 2 or more grade levels below where they should be to develop their phonics and phonemic awareness.
And we've already had a pilot on this, is that?
Yes, we did have several schools field test this last year and saw significant gains in the students who they use this with in their intervention programs.
And this went through the Instructional Materials Committee and
That it did. It both, when it was a field test under our previous 2020P, it was approved for a field test for this last year, and then they brought that data back and made a recommendation that we actually adopt it as supplemental materials.
And was that, do you recall the vote on that? Unanimously?
Yes, I believe that it was a unanimous vote, but I can actually double check on it and make sure.
Okay, so that will really help our kids that are having issues. I'd be interested to see the data on that when they implement it and see how it works. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any further discussion? Okay, I'll call for the vote on 2.02, Instructional Materials Committee textbook adoption funds for reading. All those in favor, signify by raising your right hand and saying aye.
There were two different ones, but the one she was talking about was the 14 to 24.
Abstentions, the motion carries. We're on to 2.03, purchase CKLA just for my awareness, a little bit more knowledge on
Let me
that.
call on Ms. Christine Corbally to come up and add some additional information for you.
So we did a full review this last year of K-5 literacy materials to address our literacy issues that we have in the district, address meeting our goal of all third graders meeting standard. And when we did that review, utilizing a variety of rubrics, we determined that we couldn't come to a conclusion about which curriculum and that we needed more data. And this particular curriculum ranked the highest when it came to alignment to the research around teaching reading and the science of reading. So the committee voted that this would be the curriculum that we would attempt to pilot. Schools were then invited to participate in that pilot based on their data. Their student data and where it might be most impactful, because we have urgency. When only 50% of our students are reading at grade level by third grade, we have an urgent need to address that and to address the other gaps that we know exist because of COVID, which you as a board have talked about a number of times. And so it was determined that we should move forward with a field test because of the urgency of the need of our students.
This may be beyond your capability, but on these, when we're bringing in new material or having tests, how long does it take to see if it's really making a difference? Or, I mean, because that could vary from child to child, but I mean, is there any average or anything that we can look for to see data changes if it's working?
We do hope, based on what we've seen in other school districts because we did contact other school districts who have implemented this particular curriculum, to see some small changes. You're not going to see large changes in the first year because teachers are learning how to use the material and to teach reading in a different manner than we have been teaching it in this school district. And so we hope to see some changes and improvements in certain areas, but you won't see any, I would say, large gains for 2 to 3 years.
Is that one of the reasons why there's kind of a disagreement about what curriculum we use, is because there's a new philosophy being used in teaching reading? Is that why this is a field test and there hasn't been an adoption per se?
I think that is part of it, right? When you're evaluating new and you're looking at how we're going to change the way we approach, and the materials are radically different than what you've experienced in the last 5 to 10 years, that creates a dynamic that we need to test it out and figure out what's best going to. It also provides us the opportunity to determine what types of professional development we need as an entire system to actually implement this curriculum well with fidelity.
That's going to be my next question, because if it's a new way to teach reading, what kind of professional development do we have planned to kind of do this, so we're not just throwing new curriculum at
We have
educators?
pretty extensive professional development. We have 2 full days up front and then ongoing embedded professional development where we'll be going in and doing coaching alongside of the teachers and doing sort of a studio model with them, besides also training our coaches in those buildings to actually support on a day-to-day basis the implementation of the new curriculum.
It's like you're reading my mind, because I was going to ask about the instructional coaches and how they're being trained, so that's great, thank you.
Is any of this, the money for this coming from ESSER funds? Would it qualify under there at all?
I don't know that I can answer that question, but we had budgeted for purchase of curriculum for this year, so it was coming out of the basic ed for that, but we could certainly get an answer.
Just curious, because it would.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, I'm trying to find how long is this pilot?
The pilot will be for the full year. We will in the spring, though, when we do our spring data, when we do our testing in the spring, we will collect some data around how it is going, and then make a determination and come back to the IMC with a recommendation about whether to fully adopt.
Is there a backup plan if people aren't on board with this?
We would have to go through the review process again if the data indicated that this was not the curriculum to adopt.
Well, I just have a comment. I'm glad that we are investing in both of these measures in the kids to hopefully, really see some results. So thank you for your
And
work
I'd also
on that.
add, if I may, to the process, this is best practice in how you should assess before you spend the millions and
Yes.
millions of
Yeah.
dollars.
Exactly. Yes.
But we talked about data earlier today, this evening, that
Right.
that's part of what should drive. So whether someone likes it or not, we should make decisions on data.
Right.
How's that improving the reading of our students? And how have we set up the standardization of the field test or pilot so that it gives us true data from a fidelity standpoint? And so this process is best practice. And so thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Corbally, for your additional information.
I appreciate on the agenda all the different cycles of data that are going to be collected throughout the year, so I really appreciate seeing that.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote on 2.03, purchase CKLA Camino K-5 literacy program for field tests. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand and saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by raising your right hand and saying nay. Abstentions, the motion carries. We're on to 2.04, personnel report. I'll entertain a motion.
I move adoption of 2.04 personnel report.
Second.
Discussion.
Only feedback I got is, I remember getting an email from someone recently asking why the classified and certificated staff have different spacing. And so I just thought that was interesting, not necessarily good or bad thing, but one of the people that emailed talked about that feels different for a reason. And I don't know if that's necessarily a good or bad thing. I just thought that was interesting, wondering and noticing, because I never noticed the spacing until someone brought it to my attention. But just a comment, really. I was just curious about that.
I'd like to certainly get back to
Yeah.
you with that, just
Yeah.
so we have that. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Oh, yeah.
Any other further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote on 2.04, personnel report. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand and saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by raising your right hand and saying nay. Abstentions, the motion carries. We're on to 2.05, supplemental personnel report. I'll entertain a motion.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the supplemental personnel report for the appointment of the assistant principal for Panther Lake Elementary.
I second.
Discussion. It looks like from her credentials and everything, that it's going to be a good fit for that school with her training in special education, SEL and all of that background, and also her leadership. It looks like that it's going to be a good fit for Panther Lake. So that's just my comments. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote on 7.05. All those in favor of approving the supplemental personnel report for the assistant principal for Panther Lake Elementary signify by raising your right hand and saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by raising your right hand and saying nay. The motion carries. We're on to,
3.01.
okay, we're on to informational, and it looks like the purpose of,
Purchasing, yeah.
okay, it looks like 3.01, nutrition services purchase, micro computer systems, micro 12 computers. So that's, does anybody have any questions or discussions on that, on 3.01?
Can someone explain to us what is microcomputer systems?
That is Micro is who we purchase our systems from, so that's
okay.
Micro. And this is a standard process for food service.
NESPO.
Sounds like it's a need, especially at the secondary schools.
Yes, it is.
Which I've seen some lunchrooms.
Yeah.
It's definitely needed.
Yeah, so this is just kind of add to our efficiencies and stuff like that.
Oh, we don't need to do a vote on it, right?
Any other further discussion? Okay. All right, it looks like we are at 7:45, and we are officially adjourned.
Wow.
Thank you.